Welcome to Noon Hour Slides from the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. We're located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We pay our respects to First Nations and Métis ancestors and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We gratefully acknowledge funding from the City of Moose Jaw, Sask Arts, Sask Culture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, Canada Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, and the Government of Canada. I'm Vincent Hotelling, the administrative assistant here, and I'm here to welcome you to today's presentation. Elaine Stutt is here to complete the story of the 6 modern Celtic nations.
Okay, last month, whenever it was, we did them alphabetically by the names in their own languages. So we did Alba, Bres, and Cymru. Now we're doing Eire, Curnow, and Mann. That is Ireland, Cornwall, and Man. But who were the Celts? It's a long time ago, but who they weren't is they weren't Neolithic and they weren't Bronze Age. They were defined archaeologically by 2 cultures, the Hallstatt, and both of these were in the Alps, and they moved widely, and you can tell them by what they left. They left metal things. They left art. All right, so this is how we recognize the ancient Celts, by their art, the artifacts, their coins. Their coins had names on them, so we could take those names and assign. There were a ton of Celtic tribes, like the Parisi, named for Paris. They were in both the continent and in Britain. The other thing we can tell is by text. The Romans had text. The lives of the early Christians had text, Irish text, Welsh text. But the problem is a lot of them, Roman texts were military propaganda, so was the Christians. And there's a lot of myths and legends, but when you correlate between all of these, you get facts. And one other thing about the Celts, we know them by their languages. There were continental languages. There's the P Celts, which is all of England and Scotland spoke a Brittonic language. Gaelic was in Ireland. And this is where the Celts were. They were all over Europe. You can see the blue line, and don't trust it, especially on it's too far over on the far east. But you can see what's left is to the far north, and that's all of them are farther north than Moose Jaw, except for Cornwall and Brittany. But they were left at the far edges of the continent. Why? Invasions. Roman conquest. The Romans didn't get into Scotland or Ireland. The Celts themselves moved back and forth between Ireland and Scotland, and Wales, and some of the Welsh moved down, and the Cornish mostly moved down into Brittany, which is why Brittany still has a language. And there was the Germanic tribes, Anglo-Saxons, Jutes, and all the Vikings. The Norman invasions, and the Tudors. The Protestant Reformation had a terrible effect on Ireland and Scotland. But the languages survived, in some cases just barely, but all the continental languages and culture went extinct. Not necessarily the culture, but anyway, they were left with the Irish, Scots, and Manx Gaelic, Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. And you can see those are bilingual signs in Welsh. So today we're going to Ireland, and they're famous for their symbol as the harp. And it's an island. So we took a ferry. And this is the River Liffey in Dublin. But now we're going north up by Drogheda to see one of the Neolithic monuments. And there's 3 of them together. Unfortunately, when we were there, only one was open. But Newgrange, it's huge. It's a passage tomb. It's older than the pyramids or Stonehenge. And it was refurbished a while back, basically to allow for visitors. The whole facade, they put white stones on, quite understandably, because there were white stones and when they excavated it, but there's a lot of disagreement about how they should have done it. And especially the front, they wanted to leave the curbstones in place with the beautiful art carving. But to do that, they had to insert stairs and everything, which was odd. And we were able to go there and go inside on a tour. Tour is quick. Actually, in like 87, we were able to just go by bicycle and get a tour with a half hour. Now you have to plan a long time in advance. But you can see the back, how they put the curbstones on. And it's a huge passage and very remarkable with like a corbelled ceiling, but they didn't allow pictures inside. And the visitor center is on the others. You have to take a bus to get to it from the visitor center. The visitor center is the other side of the Boyne River. And the Boyne River being also famous for the Battle of the Boyne, the battle between the Protestants and the Catholics in the 1600s. But the visitor center is quite nice. There's a cafeteria well set up for kids. But we didn't spend all that much time there because we were going by bus. Next, back to Dublin. We went to the National Museum of Ireland. And Ireland, of course, was in the British Empire, so you can see it's a lot of British Empire architecture. And here's early Celts. What the Celts did a lot, they made heads. So these are classic Celtic heads that were found in Ireland. The other thing the Irish are known for is their metalwork and the interweaving. And a lot of the interweaving they probably got from the Vikings, but they were an expert at it. It's beautiful metalwork. These are the croziers, like a bishop's hook. And there, I don't know if you can see all the detail, but up on the things, there's animal figures crawling over the top of it. And it looks like a horse. And at the bottom, you can see a little figure on the bottom. This is another one, just amazing, climbing over. There's a series of like lions climbing over the head of the cross. And the cross of coin. And what I like at the bottom, what you see on the right is there's a little creature's head is biting the bottom of the cross, holding it still. And much more simply, but is Ohm stone, and those were, it's a sort of a coded alphabet used to put on marker stones. They're just the notches on the edge of a rock. And this is the center of the, a very British 18th century museum type, very pretty. And outside had carving on the basis of the columns, all these little animals chasing each other around the columns, which I really liked. And then there's St. Stephen Green. It's right in the middle of Dublin. And it was historical, like there was fighting there during the Revolution. And they have the whole stories, some good and some bad. Like, for instance, they had a truce so that the gameskeeper could go in and feed the fowl, the waterfowl during the fighting. But revolutionaries killed one of the guards who was unarmed, so that's not great. This is an earlier Robert Emmet, one of the revolutionaries from the, I think, 1700s. It's another, but it's a very nice little park. We were also there in January, so it wasn't very warm. We stopped. There's a lot of pubs. They're renowned, and we went into one of the pubs to get warm. Back on the Liffey. St. Patrick's Cathedral, one thing in Ireland is most of the older churches are Anglican Church of Ireland because they kept the church and the Catholics made new cathedrals after. But there were, contacts with the empire. There are a lot of monuments inside the church. Monument to the Burma War. It was a little Irish wolfhounds, but it's a South African war and the China War. And one of the things is there were a lot of true Irish people went into the British military, and they have all the battle flags hung. And we went to the Carrick's Holland Barracks Museum. This was a military barracks, but it's now a museum. It's a museum both of history and decorative arts, because you see it's a huge, huge complex. But and we didn't get many pictures, but it went into a lot and mentioned how a lot of Irish became mercenaries. Some not through fault of their own. There was a story somewhere I saw, I couldn't find a reference, that a battalion in Waterford was simply given to some, I don't know, it was the Serbs or something. Here, take this battalion. So these people had no choice. They left Ireland, probably forever. They also had pretty coins and sort of Hibernia was a creation of sort of colonialists that showed, oh, here's There's Britannia, now here's Hibernia. And one of the funny things you'll note in Ireland is they still have some of the old cast iron mailboxes, and that's VR for Victoria Regina, and they're still using it. It still works, but they've painted it green instead of red. And here's some there's a lot more to Dublin we could show you, but I have no time at all. Anyway, back on the Liffey, they did one neat thing. They put there's I think some boat tours come there in the summer, but they put a beautiful little ramp so people have extra space to sit on the place. Now we're off to Waterford, and you can see it is winter, and that's not snow, but there's frost all over the thing, frost and it's on a river port, but it's somewhat upstream. It's not right on the coast. But it was originally the city itself was originally a Viking long fort. And it was eventually conquered by the Normans, and these were Normans from Wales, they call them Canberra Normans. And you can see it's a tidal river, so when the tides load, you have mud flats. And when the Normans came, they with armies, they settled it all by a treaty. Richard de Clare, called Strongbow, married a princess of King of Munster. And there's some the whole city had a wall around it with towers. And they had an amazing museum, and what they had was a lot of old documents, and these are very old documents. You can see the one was Charles II, and how Waterford kept its power for treaties and what by dealing with the British monarchs. There was even a gift of a hat from, I think it was Henry VIII. Now we're off to Kilkenny, and Kilkenny is upstream. It's inland, but it's upstream of this. And when Strongbow was married the princess, he was given a lot of land in Munster, including Kilkenny. And he found the original wooden castle was founded by Strongbow. And it's a very nice castle now. We went inside, and there's some very interesting decorative architecture inside. And this is the River Nore in Kilkenny. The other thing in Kilkenny is a St. Canice's Cathedral. And St. Canice was one of the early Christian saints. And this is why sometimes we get Celtic history through the lives of the saints. Now, a lot of it's mythological, but you do get some facts. Anyway, St. Kilkenny didn't early convert to Christianity, and St. Canice was supposed to have defeated a Druid here. And that's the cathedral with the big tower. And Rod didn't walk up the tower, I did. You get a nice view of the top of the church. And there, like I said, the old churches tend to be Church of Ireland. So across there is the Catholic Church. And there you can see the bridge over the Nore. Now we've gone on already to Limerick on the River Shannon. And what we have here is a castle. And this Limerick, that settling was settled by the Vikings. Vikings tended to be on the coast or on the rivers, just a little way up the coast. So there's a Viking settlement, but it was later ruled by the king of the native Irish king of Munster. But it was captured by the Anglo-Normans, like 100 years, maybe 80 years after they got Waterford. They came to Limerick, captured it, and then the English king had them build a castle. And it had several sieges, evidently, but it was finally defeated by William of Orange in 1691. That's after the Battle of Boyne. And here's a cute, not cute, but a model. And it shows at one stage in the siege, one of the people holding the castle didn't let down the gate, and a lot of the Limerick forces were killed by being forced into the Shannon River. And it's a new museum. They did a lot of renovation, and now they have, I think in the summer, they have people dressed up in uniform and stuff helping you. But you can look down on the Shannon from the towers. And if you look far to the right, in the distance, you can see a little bit of a rainbow. It was raining. It was winter, and we had a fair amount of rain. And this is, you can see that on the right, you can see the new museum building that they've put, and it's actually on top of some of the, you go in the bottom first over some of the Viking ruins that were underneath it. Now we're off to Galway. Galway's on the western coast of Ireland, and it's on the River Carib. And this is I think, a 16th century map. And you can see at that point it was a walled city. And the church, again, is a Church of Ireland in the old church. One of the neat things was they had a timeline. It was founded by the Normans, who were on the coast, and it also was sieged by Cromwell. And the Anglo-Normans had 15 tribes, they called them, and 15 families, and they still had great effect, whereas most of the native Irish they dealt with them, but they tended to keep separate. When Cromwell and the Henry VIII, they were basically, the Anglo-Normans were sided mostly with the native Irish. And Cromwell, you can see what they are. The extreme Protestants didn't like any statuary at all, so they knocked the heads off of all the little angels, except one of them that was high up on a column. This is a weir on the river, and one of the new Catholic cathedrals. And this is well, basically this is on Candlemas, St. Bridget's, and we went to the Crane bar, and we found it was all women artists, 8 fiddlers, and like 4 harps. But at this point, I'm going to leave Ireland somewhat suddenly. So it's like a phonograph record. If you take it off quickly, it makes a nasty sound. That's what we have to do, because I don't have time to do the rest of Ireland. What I'm not showing you is, like in Donegal, there was a famine pot that had to do with the potato harvest, like the potato famine in the 1800s, and thousands of people died of famine, and it wasn't always adequately addressed by the British government. For instance, they were exporting grain at the same time people were starving. Derry, Londonderry in Northern Ireland, it's famous for division. Like this is, you can see there's cannons in that wall, and fences. The fences are to keep people currently from throwing things over the wall, because this is the Protestant area up top, and they're by now they're not really separated, but you could see that this was in 2017. They're still worried about it all. There was a siege in Derry in the 1600s. It was terrible. People starved. It was against the Protestants. But now in 1972, there was a civil rights march by the Catholics, and the British Army fired on the civilians and killed 26 of them. It took 50 years before a second commission found them all blameless, and Prime Minister Cameron apologized. But that was kind of the beginning of the troubles. And there's also the beautiful North Irish coast, no time for that. Belfast is beautiful. University, conservatory, museums. Also, we did a rainy tour, which showed us the still division between the Irish and Protestant sections, and they have the Peace Wall. Peace Wall is taller than the Wall of Berlin. And the Great Docks. This is where the Titanic was built, and all the shipbuilding that helped fuel the British Empire. A lot of it came from Northern Ireland. But we don't have time for that, so I'm off to Cornwall. And the Cornish flag is the black and white cross of St. Piran, another early Christian saint. And they traveled a lot. A lot of these saints went back and forth. I think Piran was originally from Ireland. But the first thing we did was we went on Cornwall is most western part of England. It's a very small little peninsula jutting out into the ocean. And it's quite rural. You can see there's farming. And what we are now is at a hill fort. It's a Bronze Age hill fort. I'm not sure why they're there. And I'm showing you this map because on the ground, you can't see clearly what's going on. You know, you're going up on a hill and there's some ditches, but anyway, this is what it looks like on the ground. Some beautiful, there's a nice hawthorn bush tree. hawthorn berries, and I always forget whether this is heather or heath. And cows. There's always somebody watching. Also, we went to St. Ives in Cornwall. And St. Ives was named for another one of the early saints that supposedly she floated over from Ireland in about the 500s. And it's an artist colony, which is why one of the reasons I was especially pleased to go to it, because the Leach pottery was there. Because when Leach wanted to make a pottery, he went to Cornwall for probably for the clay, but also because it was an artist colony. Bernard Leach and Shoji Hamada. Leach went to Japan, and when he learned all about how to pot. He was actually a painter originally, and he learned how to pot, and he learned an aesthetic from the Japanese. And Hamada came back with him, and they built a kiln, one of these Japanese, I think it's in Noborigami, I'm not sure. But it turned out they didn't know how to make kilns, so they had to go back to Japan to get another guy to make a proper kiln. But Leach had many apprentices, and he'd always sit and by this fireplace and talk about what worked. And these are his tools, mostly handmade. And you can see in the front of the building where they used to get their supplies of clay. They still do. It is a small little place. There's a little creek beside it. And they're continuing to build it in kind of with a Japanese ethic, because that was so important to their style. And then you can buy, they still have students in there and you can buy things. But if you look at that little teapot there, I think that was made by Hamada. And you may think, oh yeah, Japanese teapot. But the thing is, in 1920, when they were doing this, nobody had teapots like this in America or England. And what they were responsible for is the whole craft pottery tradition, because at that time, most people, craft potters were using cast pottery and painting the outsides. Nobody was throwing pots, but it was, Leach wasn't the only one, but he was one of the first one to start the whole thing of craft pottery, whereas artists, sometimes university artists will throw their own pots and put decoration on them. And Bernard Leach and Hamada are largely responsible for that. So after that, we walked around St. Ives, and St. Ives is a really big tourist spot. It was crowded. It could be because there was some art shows on, but it was really crowded. And you park up on the hill and get a bus downtown, quite crowded. And we went to the little old, one of those local museums like you see here, where they're all full of stuff. The stuff there was largely to do with fishing, because fishing was very important. It was the fuel of their economy. So you can see all the little boats and pictures of boats and things. And one of the things we didn't get a picture of is they actually recreated in the basement a pilchard salting cave, that where they caught a lot of pilchard, which I think is a type of small herring, and they salted it down, and it was at one point, incredibly important to the economy. In Cornwall, we actually rented a car, which we didn't do often, but you can see the roads are narrow, and unlike, say, in the US, when they cut the trees back, in Cornwall, they cut them back. They only cut them back to the shape of a bus, and they leave everything else. But you might notice and this is a good road. The shoulders are like about 6-inch wide, and then beyond that, there's a tree or a wall. So that, for us, these roads were challenging. And we especially got some one-way dirt runs, which were even more challenging. Then we went to Penzance. There's a beautiful garden, and being again on the seacoast, there's war dedications. And of course, Britain was right in the midst of World War II, so this is a dedication to a ship, the HMS Penzance, sank. And we were getting food actually, because we were going to a concert later, so we picked up some food at some shops here we were to picnic with. And we went out to near Land's End, and it's right on the ocean. What it is a theater, and it's right on the coast. I mean, and quite steep, but we were there to see two artists. But looking out on the water there, I actually saw two gannets fishing, and gannets are an ocean bird. You don't see them easily, but right from here we can see the gannets. Who we were there to see is a whole story. Bueno We actually saw her in Montreal when she was with the band of Pepettes, but she was unique because we saw that the Cornish languages are threatened, and it was technically extinct as a language, but there were a few speakers. They taught some other people. So Gweno's father was a Cornish language activist. His mother was a Welsh language activist. Gweno is a native speaker because when she was born, her parents told her Cornish. It's her native first language. So Gweno is one of the first 20th century Cornish language speakers. And this was the warm-up act, Daisy, who's also Cornish. But Gweno, when she was a dancer as a kid, she ended up in Las Vegas with the Michael Flatley river dance thing. And then she joined the Pepettes, and then she started making electronic music, which she picked up in Vegas. And the concert that we saw was entirely in Cornish. She had a Cornish language record, and the whole concert was in Cornish, although she announced them in English as well. But so that was really special. And at one point, she had the whole audience doing the chorus. There's the Cornish as like the Welsh, like cheese. So she had a song about cheese with a chorus, and so the whole audience was singing a chorus in Cornish. Leaving the concert, and we had to drive on those small roads at night, which we managed to do successfully. Then the next day we had to take the car back to Truro to turn it in. And if you look, you see these are that they have a lot of roundabouts, travel circles, and they're really complicated, and they give you these maps in advance so you can figure out where you're going. And more than once we had to go around the circles more than once to try and figure out where we were. Truro is quite a ways inland, but it's on a tidal river. So even though it's inland, it has access to the sea. It has a big, I guess it was a market square, but they've now cleared it and made it a plaza, statues. And we found a nice restaurant with pirates. And we asked permission. They said, yes, we could take their picture. They were out for somebody's birthday. And like I said, you could actually get a boat from Falmouth on the coast, which is where we were staying, back to Truro, but it wasn't, time of year we were there, it wasn't running except on weekends. And there you can see the Cornish flag. And we stayed in Falmouth. It was a very pleasant town. And you can see they have some tourist things. And a big old hotel. There was a lot of tourism in the Victorian area. This is one of the big old hotels. We had they probably have small rooms by modern standards, but anyway, we did go in and have tea. And they had a beautiful garden. One thing about Cornwall, it's on the south coast, so they call it England's Riviera, because you can see that they're growing tropical plants, that it's warmer on that south coast of Cornwall, which is a little bit farther south than Moose Jaw. But Falmouth does have a commercial port, and you'd see the ships kind of staging out in front of where we were. And there were beaches, but there were also rocky areas where you could look at all the sea life. And these are oyster catchers. They're also looking for sea life. There's some limpets. And we walked, and there's an area between the two beaches that at low tide you can walk along carefully because it's slippery. And this is the hotel we were in, which had a view of the sea. It's quite nice. And that's Gillyvays Beach. There's also a maritime museum. You know, they had a moving exhibit on pirates. Pirates were important, especially actually in Isle of Man, which we'll go to next. But the museum was wonderful because it showed boats, and I know nothing about boats, and they tell you, oh, which sort of boat was which. They also had an exhibit on tattoos. Sailors used to do tattoos. And it's on a pier, so that you can see the sign says mid tide and low tide. That's me taking pictures of the fish through the window. And when we left, we had an encounter with gulls. The thing about gulls is they seem healthy and happy, but they're not. A lot of them, their populations are plummeting because the oceans don't have enough fish anymore. So what they do is they come inland. And not this particular one, but after we got the museum, we got some lovely cream donut from a stand. It was one of the best cream donuts I ever had. Rod had one, and a gull swooped over his shoulder and grabbed it and gobbled it down. So because the gulls can't find enough fish, they're coming in shore and becoming quite thieves. So I saw them take somebody's Belgian waffle. I saw them knock down a girl's snow ice cream cone and eat it. So the gulls need food and they'll get it. And this is the Gillyvays beach right below our house. And you can see the flags are up. They have lifeguards, and the flags are to show where they think it's safe to swim or where it's a good idea to swim. And there was surfing. Quite a lot of surfing. That the one in the back, I think, is a kite sail, and the one in the front is a sailboard. And you can see why they have notices on the flags, is you don't want those people running into the swimmers. And the sailboards are interesting because they have a little, you can see that he's above the water on this little metal fin, like a keel. And which is interesting. When they get going, they're up on that little keel thing. And it was a windy, cold day, somewhat rainy, and you could see there the lifeguards bringing in the flag. The shift is over. And one of the nice ways to see it was just to sit in the restaurant. There was a restaurant right on the beach, a little bit warmer. Now, I'm rushing through this because I have a ton of slides. But anyway, now we're going to the Isle of Man. And to get to Man, in the summer, you can go from Dublin, you can go from Liverpool, but the only way you can go by ferry in the winter is from Lancaster. From Lancaster, you get at the train station, you get another train shuttle down to the port of Port, and another ferry. And one thing about the Isle of Man is it has a legendary protector. Manon MacLear is an Irish deity, an Irish god. And he's especially claimed by Man from where he's supposed to come. And they said that he would protect Man. And one of the ways he protected Man was by putting a fog around it so nobody could find it. So what is this Man? It's the Isle of Man. Usually the Isle of Man only has one end, and it's frequently just IOM. But you can see their symbol is the three legs. That's the symbol and the flag of Man. And on the little stonework is a cross, the remnants of an Irish of a Christian cross. You just see the one arm and the top at the top. But why it's unique is because it has runes on it. And evidently there were Vikings came and took over Man around the 10th century. I forget how long they were there, but Man was ruled from Norway at some point. But the Isle of Man has something like 26 runic crosses, and Norway only has 33. So in Nordic history, Isle of Man is important. We arrived in ferry, like I said. And actually, nice thing about the ferry at Douglas is you can just walk off it. You don't have to take a bus all the way through a huge port, but you can see the cars unloading from the ferry. And a lot of not only cars make it across on the ferry, but a lot of you can see the semis on the top deck. A lot of them, a lot of goods get moved to the Isle of Man by ferry. We're in Douglas, and we're in Douglas in early February or mid-February, so it wasn't that warm. And this makes it look like the bay is a perfect round bay. It's not. You're just looking in one direction, looking the other. And turns out the first day we were there, it was high tide, and the rest of the time we were at low tide. So this looked like a cute little island. The rest of the time it just looked like a mound of seaweed. It wasn't really that big at all. And there were lots of birds rummaging through the seaweed to find something to eat. One on left is a jackdaw and the one on the right is a crow. And Douglas was a big Victorian resort. People like to come over from England to Douglas, and they'd had a big long promenade along these houses, and that's what Victorians did. They strutted, and also right in the middle you see a big yellow building. That was a theater, and we actually went to see Evita there, a local production of Evita, which was quite fun. But this is the big promenade area where all the Victorian tourists would promenade along. And it's difficult to tell how many of those houses are still occupied. Some of them aren't, some of them are B&Bs, hard to say. But you can see here the beach is a little bit smoother. And then and there's buses everywhere, buses on Isle of Man, just like compared to Saskatchewan, it has no buses. Civilized countries like Man have buses. So we took the bus to the southern part of the island to Port Erin, which looks a little like the housing, a little like Douglas. You can see the fields up above town, and there's a fishing dock out there, and they had all clearly the regulations for what you could catch and how to measure it, and how to measure the size of a lobster. And there were some lobster traps right there. And then on the ferry, we bought a hiking guide to Man. So we knew that we could just walk over to Port Mary. So that's what we did. It was quite a pleasant walk. And I love all the stone fences. They're just beautiful and frequently have plants growing out of them. And this is Port Mary. And again, it looks a little like Douglas. Women walking their dogs. And they had a well. And if you look in Celtic myth, and wells are in Celtic myths, Irish myths, wells are very important, Irish, Welsh, that when something mythic or a god appears, they usually appear by a well. And you can see the signs in Manx Gaelic and English, coastal footpath. And somebody done a lot of infrastructure that this path went all the way along the coast of Port Mary. We walked along it. And I wanted to show the toilet because, of course, if you're walking around and it's cold, one of the things you would really like to have is a toilet, especially if there's no restaurants open at the time. And the waves. And this was you can see the little memorial wreaths on the wall, but this is a monument, and you can see as appropriate for the Navy, that's an anchor, and that's part of the monument. And we walked, there is something called the Calf of Man, which is an island, and we figured maybe we can walk far enough to get to the Calf of Man, but it was much farther. We couldn't tell from them, but there's no way we could get to it, but we did walk a little way along the coast. And what we were rewarded for was by a nice sunset. And when we came back, there was this lion. Somebody put a lion out in front of the house. I don't know why, but I thought it was so cute. Anyway, on the bus, on the way there and the way back, we're just tootling along, and they're very good buses, have announcements. And the announcements will come on and saying you're about to come to Port Isaac, whatever. But this one, suddenly announcement came on. It is the custom in Man that when we cross the bridge, we say hello to the ferries. So she said, then a few seconds later, she said, hello, ferries. See, it's bad luck not to say hello to the ferries. I think it's more of a tourism thing now, and evidently there's more than one ferry bridge, but the big ferry bridge was between Douglas and Port Erin. We got back there at night. It was kind of wet. And you could see the whole promenade of the beach and the beautiful big hotel up on the hill. The next day, we took a bus across to the west of Man to see, there's a castle. Unfortunately, the castle wasn't open in winter, but we could walk around it. And it's a fishing village. They fish scallops. There was one beach. I didn't get a good picture of it, but see that beach down there? There's beside the castle, that was all covered in scallop shells, entirely scallop shells. Another castle. And then we came down off the headland and there was Manx Kippers. Unfortunately, I think that building, that business is now shut. But then we went to the museum in Peel, one of the big things. And they actually call it the House of Manan. Manan Lear is the deity, the god of the oceans. And what are these characters doing? These are Vikings and they're hauling a ship on shore. Because like I said, Man was ruled by the Vikings in the 900 or so, 900 to 1100 AD, I'm not sure. But you see, they're pulling the ship ashore. And the Vikings in Man were generally, they moved in, they got farms, they were good citizens, they did this. So the people were, like, for instance, the women would speak Gaelic and were Catholic, and the Vikings were pagan and spoke Norse. And it seemed to work out, but not to sugarcoat it too much. The Vikings were raiders also, maybe not so much the one on Man, but you can see in the front of the prow, there's a red blanket. You can see that's actually a person, and that person is an Irish woman who's been kidnapped from Ireland. So they were slave traders. That woman may become a prostitute, she may become a house on a farm to a Viking husband, but the point is, she had no choice in the matter. She was kidnapped. So sexual slavery, nothing new, and it was happening among the Vikings and the Irish too. The Irish took slaves. And actually, I'm trading museums here. This is from the museum in Douglas, but this is an early Celtic house. And so a family or a group of extended family would live in the center of that, and would be livestock all around the outside. And these are some Viking crosses. This is called a dragon cross, or Viking inspired anyway. And there's some little dragon heads on the bottom of that one. And why these are unique is because these are some of the runic crosses. And the runes are on the side that we can't see, but the dedication is to Thorleif Hanaki's son. But you can see that there's 4 dragons, and the dragons have little heads like intertwined, and they have little heads like lizards. And then the runic on the other side, which I didn't get, and it looks like I don't know if I could have got it. They had Odin fighting something. So in terms of sort of Nordic mythology, a fairly important artifact. And the runes on it say Thorvald raised this cross. Another thing in the museum, like the museum in St. Ives, is fishing was very important. So here's a display of women salting the fish. Now here we are on the other headland. We're looking back to the museum and back to the castle, because from our tour book, we knew we could walk along the headland, which is what we did. Rod's behind me. He wasn't as enthusiastic about this as I was. Usually he's ahead. We could look back at the castle. And we found a nice restaurant there. Then back to Douglas, and what is this? This is the Bee Gees. The Bee Gees, at least one of them was born on Man. They lived on Man for a while, or they moved to Australia. And one of them, Robin, I think, had a house in Peel, and kept it for years. Then we took another bus. We took out to Glenmona because we wanted to see a Neolithic monument. It was a very pretty day. And the monument is an old passage tomb, like a smaller version of what they had at Newgrange. But you see that the stones are bare. Why? That's because over the years, sometimes they were excavated clumsily by Victorian archaeologists. But the other thing is that farmers would say, oh, look, there's a lot of loose dirt and stone here. We can use this for building. So if this was covered by a mound of stone, the farmers slowly would take away the stones, and all was left was the big megaliths. And so this was a tomb. And you can see the outer stones were the curved stones, and the inner stones were where you would have gone inside the tomb. And you can see a mountain in the background. I don't think this is the mountain, but Man and Lear was supposed to live on top of one of the mountains of Man. There you can see the inner stones that there was only, I believe, 5 people entombed in this one. And the thing, like in England, is the same in Man, is that there are common law footpaths, and they let you go through people's property. So after we came through that gate, the person let loose her horses, and the horses came through. They seemed friendly enough. And maybe I forgot to mention, what is Man? Man is not a part of the United Kingdom. Man is a crown dependency on Ireland. It's its own country, it has its own money, but it's largely dependent on England. But it's not a part of the United Kingdom, which is odd. It's a crown dependency. And after that, we walked down to Cornell Beach, which was very, very nice, pleasant walk. And it was water everywhere. I mean, it was winter. It wasn't raining then, but there were little creeks and rivulets coming down. And then we got on a bus, some rowdy teenagers, and went to Ramsey, which is the northern city, and had dinner there. And of course, given that it's like it's north, it's farther north than Moose Jaw, so that the winter nights are not very long. The winter days are not very long. And we found a really nice Italian restaurant with a very friendly man. And then the bus back to Douglas. So these were crocuses coming through the lawn, very pretty, but this was February 19th. And in Man, that's early spring. But you know, Man is significantly farther north than Moose Jaw, and it's just the effect of being on an island and not being in the middle of the continent, so that the water keeps the island warm in the Gulf Stream. And then here's back in Douglas, and you see this is a little ship monument, again with a little Viking motif. And their you can see their symbol as a peregrine falcon and a raven, and in the center. And the raven is a big Viking symbol for Thor, whatever. But you can see the three legs of Man. And they don't know, people think, well, that maybe comes from the Neolithic Triskele, but actually they think it's much more recent, that it may have, because there's a 3 legs in Sicily and various other places. First place they find it in Man on documents in the 1300s. Then there's this funny little castle in the middle of the bay, and it's not really a lighthouse, but it was supposed to be a safe place for some reason. But you can see it's on the ship. Shield of Douglas, which in Manx Gaelic is Doomish. And there's our steam packet, and we're gone. So I think that was a tremendous amount of slides. I rushed through them very quickly, but anyway, that's it. And if there's any questions.